Please be aware that the following video contains images and discussion of physical assault. And as much as I'm aware that I am about to become part of the problem, I would encourage people to look into the winners of last night's Oscars, as their work and their accolades are being overshadowed by the controversy surrounded by the night's events. This would include, amongst others, openly queer actress Ariana DeBose, deaf actor Troy Kotsur, and Questlove, whose documentary Summer of Soul is probably being the single most overshadowed thing in the wake of everything going on. I would encourage you to look up their acceptance speeches and look into their work. And that having been said, I will now become, as I noted, part of the problem. So in the past, I've done everything from talk about Oscar nominees, talked about the show after it happened, talked about winners. I even live streamed a reaction to it. I think I did that last year. And this was the year I honestly thought, you know what, I don't really need to talk about the Oscars. I looked at the list of nominees, realized I hadn't seen hardly any of them, didn't want to see most of them, didn't have strong feelings about too much of it, and figured I can skip this year's Oscars. It's fine. But then
Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Well, the Oscars aren't actually about the Oscars anymore. So at the Academy Awards, Chris Rock was presenting the Oscar for Best Documentary. And being Chris Rock, he came out and he started doing some jokes. And being Chris Rock, he singled out a few people in the audience and had a little fun at their expense. And whatever you think of any of the individual jokes told, this is kind of par for the course. It's not uncommon for the Oscars in general, or for Chris Rock in particular, who has presented at the Oscars before. But then something different happened. He made a joke directed specifically at Jada Pinkett Smith, and it related to her hair. Now, we'll take a closer look at the joke in a little bit, but he made that joke, and that seemed to be the last joke he was going to do. He was prepared to move on. But then Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith's husband, very famous actor in television, film, famous as a rapper, and later the same evening, winner of Best Actor for his role in King Richard, walked up and slapped Chris Rock across the face, and then went back to his seat, from which he proceeded to yell,
"Keep my wife's name out your f***ing mouth!"
I'm going to.
And there is literally no conversation about the Oscars other than this right now. This was bonkers. Here's the thing. I don't actually want to talk about the event itself all that much for a number of reasons. The big one being, I don't actually know how I feel about this. But a big part of the reason that I don't know how I feel about this is due to all the stuff that I do want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the conversations that are happening around this event, the different framings, the different angles that different people are coming at this from, and the way in which it is very quickly twisted and morphed into something far bigger than a single incident. And this has been kind of nuts to me because, look, I'm not on Twitter nearly as much as some of my peers here on YouTube. I'm not used to seeing this play out in real time. I'm not used to seeing huge swaths of the trending page to be about this one single thing just coming at it from different angles. I'm not used to watching that unfold. And it's kind of fascinating. And I think in many ways illustrative of the ways in which people bring their own unique perspective, baggage, and sometimes biases to a topic. And I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, politicize it to their own ends. Because so much of the online discourse right now, it is spun off in so many disparate directions, and I'll be going over a lot of them. That has to do with what people actually want to talk about. And so they take this incident and use it to springboard into something else altogether. Even the people more or less sticking to the topic have gone on some wild tangents, and conversations in threads have gone all over the place. And this is by no means going to be comprehensive. Like, I'm recording this the day after the entire thing happened, and I'm going to try and have this out one day after that, so 2 days after the thing happened. This entire discourse will already have mutated multiple times by the time I get this out. So don't come here expecting a comprehensive overview. This, for me, the value I'm trying to extract from talking about this is mostly just this kind of weird, strange, multi-layered discourse train wreck is a big part of why it's actually hard to talk about these topics at all. And is actually why I don't really have a personal take, because while I don't think every angle that people are approaching this topic from is valid, a number of them are, or at least I feel like are fair to factor in. And the more things I factor in to the overall picture of this, the less I'm like, I don't know how to feel about this. But to the extent that I am going to be comfortable doing it, let's talk about the incident in a bit more detail. So, Chris Rock's joke. His joke was to imply that Jada Pinkett Smith would be starring in G.I. Jane 2.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
That joke, for context, if you don't know G.I. Jane, that was a film from the late 90s in which Demi Moore appeared, and at this point is probably most famous for the fact that she shaved her head for the role. So him making that joke towards Jada Pinkett Smith was a joke about her shaved head. Now, that, broadly speaking, without getting into more context, which we will get into, is an okay joke. It's about the appearance of a celebrity. And generally, picking on celebrities is usually considered punching up, and not generally considered to be punching down. However, jokes at the expense of medical conditions is usually considered punching down. The thing is, Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head is not a fashion thing. She has a condition called alopecia, and she had been battling hair loss for a very, very, very long time until she finally just said, to hell with it, and shaved her head and owned it. And that's what she's been doing for a little while now. So for him to make a joke highlighting her shaved head, whether intended or not, whether he knew this about her or not, you can have a completely separate discussion over whether he did or didn't know this about her, but we honestly don't know. Most people might think, well, everybody knows this about her. I mean, like, yeah, if you follow this stuff, but I don't know that he does. Yes, he lives in that world. That doesn't mean he knows everything that goes on with everybody. But regardless, whether intended or not, the joke becomes a joke at the expense of a medical condition. And it's generally at this point kind of considered bad form to pick on that. I mean, except among, people who kind of make their career intentionally poking the bear. And arguably, Chris Rock can be that kind of comedian. I will say I do personally feel the joke was in poor taste. Again, whether he fully appreciated that or not, I don't know. And I see other people talking in very definitive terms that he must have known. But I don't know if that's true. I'm not comfortable assuming. But it's not a joke I'm going to defend. I don't think it was a joke in good taste. And one more tiny bit of context about that is that if he did know about her condition, and if he knew that her shaving her head was, yes, her choice, but a choice heavily influenced by something she had no control over, that becomes a bit worse when you take into account that he helped produce a documentary about Black women's relationship with their hair and how important that relationship is. It was a documentary called Good Hair. He helped make that happen. So if he knew that that wasn't just a fashion choice and he made fun of a Black woman's hair, or in this case, her lack of hair, that's wow.
Wow.
Now, Chris Rock has taken shots at both Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith. He's done so at the Oscars, for that matter.
It's not fair that Will was this good and didn't get nominated. Yeah, you're right. It's also not fair that Will was paid $20 million for Wild Wild West, okay? Jada boycotting the Oscars is like me boycotting Rihanna's panties. I wasn't invited.
I don't want to put too much weight on this because, as I said, it's not like he targeted them exclusively. He makes fun of people. That's part of his routine.
Kev make movies fast. Every month. Porno stars don't make movies that fast.
But I feel like it's at least worth bringing up because it's one more factor that may have been in there where it becomes less about a joke that a guy told and more about, okay, I've put up with stuff from you before, I'm not going to anymore. Was that the case? Was that the mentality that Will Smith stormed that stage with? I have no idea, but it is something that's in the mix. Don't know for certain, but that is some of the context that some people are upset at Chris Rock about. So that's the joke. Now let's talk about Will Smith. So Will Smith, initially, as the camera shows, laughed at the joke. Jada Pinkett Smith did not. She rolled her eyes very emphatically. The footage then cut back to Chris Rock, who, as I mentioned before, tried to get things going with the show again when Will Smith walked up and slapped him. And the raw anger being displayed by Smith from the footage of when he was sat back in his seat and was yelling and swearing at Chris Rock is in very stark contrast to the footage of him laughing just seconds before. We'll dig into this particular element a bit later when we start talking about the discourse, but I want to highlight it now so that you understand this is going to come up again. And having now made a call about the joke, which I don't think was a particularly good joke, the slap, I'm certainly not comfortable having watched it, like at all. But I feel really uncomfortable making a definitive stance on that. And if people are about to say, oh, you're not prepared to condemn violence, you're saying violence is okay. No, I'm not saying anything right now because this is complicated and twisted up as we're going to be getting into. I will say I was deeply uncomfortable watching it. I would vastly prefer that it had not happened. That I will say. But I also have to freely admit that has more to do with my own level of personal comfort as a viewer and, frankly, a white person. And I don't feel comfortable getting judgy primarily on that basis, because that's the only real angle that I've got on this that I have any certainty about is my own comfort level. And I'm not sure my own comfort level is relevant. It's also worth noting that even after the slap, after the swearing, Chris Rock did continue the show to the best of his ability. Dead silent room. But he moved forward.
That was a greatest night in the history of television. Okay.
So let's start looking at the different ways that people are talking about this. Okay, so first thing I feel I need to do is tackle the idea that was asked when it initially happened, I presume largely out of shock because it seems so unbelievable, but am actually still seeing some people claim that this was staged and not real, which makes no sense. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's a frankly ridiculous notion, but staged by who and to what end? If you're implying that the Academy was in on this and were fully aware of what was going to happen, why would they do that? This has completely diverted the entire conversation about the Oscars to be about nothing but this. Nobody's talking about the actual Oscars anymore. That is not to their benefit. Not to mention, the Oscars are supposed to be the classy version of this. I suppose maybe the argument is they did it for ratings, except that it happened in the middle of the thing. It's not going to suddenly get a spike in ratings. The people who cared about this were already going to watch it, and the people who didn't watch it at the time weren't going to tune in. The moment's already over. Maybe they would have gotten a little bit of spike when Will Smith went up to accept his award, but the ratings weren't going to matter, and it's not going to roll over to next year because the assumption is going to be they're going to make things so that this sort of thing isn't likely to happen again, not suddenly turn it into Jerry Springer. So if it's not being staged by the Academy as a whole, it would have to be staged between Chris Rock and Will Smith. But again, why? Chris Rock isn't that kind of comedian. He's not Andy Kaufman. He's not known for pulling this kind of prank. Like, the only angle I could possibly see this from is, it's absolutely true, Will Smith for the last few years seems to have been going out of his way to dismantle his own image, own up to things he normally avoided, and talk openly about things he didn't talk about before. And this certainly obliterated a lot of his image in the public discourse. But, like, why? The way in which he's been going about dismantling his public image has been through conversations, interviews, the book that he released, through telling truth, not staging nonsense. None of that makes sense. So we need to completely disregard the idea that it was staged. Let that go. Now, the first thing that generally you will find, or probably the first thing that started happening at least, I wasn't watching the entire thing unfold. I went to bed. But the first thing is that there is the standard argument over who was in the right. But I suppose more nuance is the wrong word. Slightly different angle on that is the question, did Chris Rock deserve it? And if he did, does that mean Will Smith was right to do it? Now, most people are intertwining those as married points, that they are inherently together. And while they are related, I think one of the most helpful notions I saw came from actually a friend of mine who I saw on Twitter, who tweeted out, Chris Rock deserved to be hit and Will Smith should not have done it. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that position. As I said, I just feel really weird. I don't know what I feel right now. But what I will say is that was a particularly helpful tweet for me to see, because it reminded me of the important point that these, while nested topics, but they're not so joined at the hip that the answer to one automatically determines the answer to another. So that's why I'm largely going to be talking about these things in separate chunks, even as I get into the discourse around them. So when discussing whether or not Chris Rock deserved it is also a discussion about, was the joke okay? And if not, was any response warranted or all right? So there's obviously some people who are going to take the classic angle of comedians should be allowed to tell whatever jokes they want without repercussions, which I don't agree with. I never have. I never will. I think comedians, like any person, have the right to free speech to say whatever they want. They do not have rights from consequences. That is not to say those consequences do or should include being slapped by an audience member. But the general tenor of the conversation on this angle, there are, as I said, the people who will simply say he should be allowed to say whatever he wants. Which, like, in life, sure, but this is supposed to be the classy movie awards event. There is such a thing as appropriate time and place, regardless of right to say something. Now, that having been said, he does do this kind of humor. He has hosted at the Oscars before. I think it's debatable whether or not these particular bits that he did were actually scripted. I've seen some people bring up the idea of, look, there's a teleprompter, these jokes would have been pre-written, the Academy signed off on it. That's not necessarily true, because oftentimes when presenters, comedians especially, start interacting with the audience, that's not pre-scripted because it can't be. They may know in advance where everyone's sitting, but they don't know what people are going to wear. They don't know, exactly what the general tenor of the night is. So generally, that's going to be a little bit more loose as they make their decision on the spot for who they're going to pick out from the audience to say something about. Now, I'm not saying definitively that was the case, but I'd be very surprised if it wasn't. So I don't think this is a case of a joke was signed off on by a lot of other people. I think it was something that he said in the moment that obviously backfired very badly. But unless I'm wrong, I don't think I am, but unless I'm wrong about that, that does mean that responsibility of the joke does lie with Chris Rock, even though the Academy would have placed him in that position knowing the kind of humor that he does. But knowing that does not mean that you know he was going to make fun of a woman's medical condition. I don't think Chris Rock knew he was going to do that until he said it. Maybe he did, but that's not the impression that I have, not from him as a performer and just from the way the Oscars usually go. The people who are really heavily scripted and teleprompted are the people who are usually doing really awkward banter between each other.
Come on, Ann, don't be so modest.
No, I'm not modest. I'm just not nominated.
You can tell when it's scripted. I don't think that was. And that does mean that he holds sole responsibility for the joke. Now, this is where we start to get the first layer of all kinds of people getting pulled into this conversation who have nothing to do with this conversation. When I say pulled in, I don't mean like they're weighing in, and maybe some of them have since I've shot this, I don't know. But at the time of recording, they're being pulled in because everybody is bringing in these other topics that they feel are related or making comparisons to other people to the point that names that have nothing to do with this, names of people who weren't there, names of people who are dead, are trending. So what I mean by that is people posted everything from "Look out, Ricky Gervais," "Dave Chappelle, you're next," asking things like, did Frank Sinatra ever hit Don Rickles? No, of course not. Don Rickles was trending. The man's dead. Just this general idea of either would this have happened to any other comedian? Has this happened to any other comedian? The answer's in the latter case definitely being no, and the other one spinning off into its own conversation. We will come back to. This is going to end up being a long video. This thing is a hydra of a topic. But that's the first thing. And then the other thing being, what if people now start responding to comedians like this? Are comedians now going to be afraid? Is this going to have a silencing effect because they're going to be afraid they get hit? And that's an odd conversation for me because I'm not sure you'll have much luck drawing an A to B comparison from Will Smith hitting Chris Rock to some heckler in a comedy club next week who causes a scene. Like, heckling happens. Storming of stages happens. It happens at award shows. Just generally not at the Oscars. But I don't see this as having much of a silencing effect because, well, comedians who deal in this kind of humor already had to worry about taking off the audience. And they've already made their decisions about how much they do or don't care about that. This is an outlier of a reaction. So that's an angle that I don't feel has a lot of legs to it. Now, in regards to the question, would this have happened if it was anyone other than Chris Rock? There is some nuance to that. One of the angles, and this is again another name that was trending, one of the angles that people came at this from was to bring up, I bet you if it was Dave Chappelle, Will Smith wouldn't have done anything. That having to do with the fact that Dave Chappelle has been working out lately and is frankly a more intimidating physical figure than Chris Rock is, who's kind of a scrawny guy. And then there becomes a question about bullying there. Would Will Smith have done this to anyone who he didn't view as being his physical inferior? And I don't know. The thing is, none of us do. And that's part of where what's so weird and discomforting to me about a lot of these conversations. That entire line of thought and all the multitude of places it goes depends on a reading of Will Smith's mental state. And we don't know his mental state. And I will never be particularly comfortable speculating on the mental state of people involved in these things. The very rare times that I dip into any kind of thought process about that, it's usually in relation to a creative decision. Like, if somebody who's running a TV show that I like makes a creative decision that baffles me, I might try and parse their mental state insofar as why would they think that's a good idea, but not to the degree that I'm going to try and psychoanalyze them, which is a bit of a cottage industry, both on Twitter and also here on YouTube, where people will take artists' work and actions and try and diagnose them as narcissists, having abandonment issues, having this, having that, thinking this, thinking that. Like, you don't know. You don't. So understand that that whole line of thought, spinning off from would he still have hit it if it was somebody else, that spins off into a whole other thing about bullying, physical intimidation, and conversations that aren't actually about Will Smith's mental state, but make a hell of a lot of assumptions about it. So I'm going to stop down that path, but understand it keeps going. Here's the next thing I want to bring up in terms of the way this is being talked about and framed, because this, I think, might be the best example of where people see something and they take an interpretation that I can't say for certain isn't accurate, but they spin it to a very specific political or social commentary end. And that has to do with that flip from laughing to storming the stage and slapping Chris Rock. Because I said I'd come back to this. Initially, Will Smith was laughing. And again, not to try and diagnose his mental state, the laugh didn't look uncomfortable to my eye. It looked genuine, or at the very least, yeah, fair. Again, I don't know his mental state, but that's how it read. So then for seconds later for him to storm the stage and slap him, you have to ask, what happened in those seconds? Now, here's the first thing to be very, very clear on. We don't actually know. I have not found anywhere, and I've looked, that there is any footage holding on that shot of Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. The footage that is available right now is the footage that was broadcast, which cuts from the two of them back to Chris Rock, and we don't see Will Smith again until he's already on his way up to the stage. So, a lot of people are asking, what happened? And again, keep in mind, we don't see the turn. We don't see what happened, or even a change in expression on Will Smith to know for certain what happened. I want to be clear on that because, again, people are talking in insanely specific and definitive terms about this. And this is where we start to get discussions about whether or not he felt he had to do it to, quote unquote, defend his woman's honor, and whether or not that was an action he took on his own, or whether it was something that Jada Pinkett Smith in some way prompted him to do. Or if the nature of their relationship is such that she feels that if she is displeased enough, it is his job to act this way. Maybe she feels that, maybe he feels that. Again, no idea. But there's a lot of very uncomfortable conversation around that. Basically, a lot of people are intending to paint Jada Pinkett Smith as a Lady Macbeth character. That, look, he was fine and laughing. She was clearly unhappy. And the assumption, again, we don't see this, but the assumption is he laughed, he turned back, saw that she was unhappy, then he got up. Now, is that a fair assumption? Probably. I don't want to cast so much doubt to be like, that definitely didn't happen. I'm saying we don't know for certain that that happened. And so it makes me very uncomfortable how definitively people are talking about something that we did not see. We don't know if he turned to look at her, saw her reaction, and then flipped and changed his perspective and went up. We don't know that for certain. Is it very likely? Yes, certainly believable and understandable, but we don't know that for a fact. Not unless the Academy releases a hold on that angle and we get an unbroken cut from him laughing to him getting up. Unless that footage comes out, we do not know that for certain. But let's talk about this framing which is being used to make a lot of different points, and sometimes disparate points. On the one end, there are people who appear to be using this to demonize Jada Pinkett Smith as the instigator of the incident, as someone who has poisoned him to act this way. The one thing I am going to say about that at this point is that that is robbing him of any agency in his choice to go up and slap a man. Now, that's not to say that whatever his pre-existing relationship is with his wife may not have influenced his decision to do that, but like, the man made a choice. He wasn't hypnotized. But the other side of this is to dissect it as an aspect of toxic masculinity, another term that was trending for a while, where the idea is that he is so protective of her that he will resort to violence in order to defend her and protect her, which absolutely is, in the broad sense, an aspect of toxic masculinity. The role of men in our society as protectors can be a very positive thing, but it can also be twisted into overprotective spouses, boyfriends, fathers who resort to violence against people in the idea that it's part of their job as protectors. So there's this conversation about the evil that is Jada Pinkett Smith and the evil that is toxic masculinity perpetuated by Will Smith. And then in the middle is the cuckold conversation, because the term cuck was also trending. Oh, this is so exhausting. Okay. I feel like I have to explain this. I feel like most people know this already, but just in case. Traditionally, the term cuckold is a term used for a man whose wife is having affairs with other men. More recently, it has taken on a meaning within fetish and kink communities for a relationship between two partners where one of them, usually the man, or at least that's the stereotype of the kink, not only has a wife or a partner who is sleeping with other people, it's something that that person is aware of and is consenting to and who gets off on it. That's what the kink is. More recently than that, it has become shorthand for an emasculating insult, basically, implying a number of things. Implying that you're too weak to control your woman. Implying that you are getting cheated on and you're too weak to do anything about it. When it's used as an insult, the implication is that the guy isn't actually okay with this. He's just so ground down by his partner that he agrees to it because he's got no spine left and he's not even a man. That's how it tends to turn up when used as an insult. And it is being used primarily in that context to refer to Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith. And this spins off into its own freaking conversation because of some relatively recently realized things about their relationship, which is to say, faithfulness has not been a constant with them. Now, the full picture and exactly what has or hasn't gone on is not entirely clear, I don't feel. Though again, people are talking very definitively about this. Here is, so far as I understand, what is known. Jada Pinkett Smith has had intimate relationships with other men while being married to Will Smith. He is aware of that, and at this point, the public is now aware of that. They have remained together. Whether or not Will Smith has had relationships with other women seems to have a slight more question mark. There were things said and conversations had where he clearly had an interest in doing so, with implications towards some specific people, such as Halle Berry, who was also trending as a result of this. And it's a little bit less clear as to how many of those things were interests, desires, future plans or hopes, or something that had in some capacity actually happened. And also, I couldn't really find definitive clear-cut instances of exactly to what extent either or the other had talked openly with each other about this. That's not to say that like this came out behind their back. This kind of came out about their relationship, it seemed at the time, in a way that like they were both just making the world aware this is something we've been dealing with. Hey, it's me in the editing phase. Quick note on this because I've looked into a little bit more. There is at least one affair from Halle Berry which Will Smith was not aware of prior to when it happened due to miscommunication over the fact that they were separated at the time and it not being clear whether or not things were going to reconcile. That was apparently a point of conflict along the way. And I guess there are implications in Will Smith's book that some of his extramarital affairs have actually happened. Again, I don't know how much confirmation there is on that. Okay, back to it. And they have framed this in a way that indicates that it has been an issue and a strain on their marriage. So it's usually one's own opinion on the ideas of monogamy and how strongly they hold that belief, whether they choose to frame this as she cheats on him or has cheated on him, or whether they view this as a dysfunctional polyamorous relationship between two people who probably weren't communicating with each other properly and maybe should have done more research into the general practice of polyamory before trying to do some version of it that clearly wasn't working, at least initially. I'm inclined to lean towards the second, given just the general tenor of the conversation that the two of them have had, and also that some of the other people who know and are close to them have had, to me indicates at least an understanding that neither one of them seems to be perfectly comfortable with monogamy, and they're trying to sort that out. Again, impression. I don't know this. Nobody knows this for certain, which again makes me very uncomfortable with the certainty with which some people are talking. But that's one more thing fueling the cuck insult that is being thrown at Will Smith. So there's that angle. Then there's the bigger picture and the meta context. And so far as I have been able to see, I'm not going to say this definitively because this might have to do with the sides of Twitter I kind of deliberately avoid. But so far, I have not seen much in the way of people actually trying to frame this as a, look, this is the result of violent black culture, or dog whistling the idea that black people are inherently violent. Hey, it's me again. So against my better judgment, I did actually check around Twitter a little bit, and yeah, no, there are definitely some people who are actually saying these things, either dog whistling it or saying it flat out. And before anyone tries to nail me on this, I did check these accounts that I am highlighting here and did see that this is consistent with other things they've said, and they do not appear to be parody or joke accounts or sarcastic tweets. This all looked sincere to me. So yeah, this is a thing too. And so we're dealing with, piled on top of each other, ideas of what kind of jokes are appropriate. Should comedians be held responsible? What counts as a reasonable way to be held responsible? Notions about how people should react to an inappropriate joke. Notions about toxic masculinity. Notions about masculinity, monogamy, and cuckoldry. Notions about the images of black people in the greater national conversation. And more than that, it's so strange to me. Because as I said, this is not unique. What is happening here happens a lot when big events that everybody is aware of happen. People start talking about it, but they don't just talk about the event. They talk about it through the lens of their particular interests, viewpoint, and often will, if not rework what happened, at the very least frame it in a way that makes their point. Some of these points are more valid than others, as I said. But the fact that there are so many, and I do feel that some of them are at least worth having conversations about, at the very least having conversations about the conversation, that's where I'm just left floundering and don't really have an opinion. I said at the start I wish it hadn't happened. I'm not sure that's true. I will actually absolutely stand by the fact I kind of wish that I hadn't watched it, and I feel uncomfortable doing so. But again, like, that shouldn't be anybody's priority. What I will say is that the fallout of all this has been really illustrative to me of something that I see talked about, but because I'm not so active on Twitter, I rarely see happen personally, which is that this one event serves almost everybody's talking points. If not directly, then having a hot take on somebody else's hot take will serve your talking points. I generally push back on the idea that someone is quote unquote politicizing a topic because, first of all, everything is inherently political. Everything is framed by the political circumstances under which we live. Everything carries inherent political connotations. There is no such thing as a truly apolitical topic. We can, for various reasons, choose to treat them as such, and sometimes there's a value in doing so. But politics are not injected into things. They exist already. But that having been said, people do absolutely have their preferred political lens through which to view things. Now, that's not the same as injecting politics into it. As I said, the politics are there. But what people do instead is they put blinders on and ignore the political aspects that don't serve whatever point they would like to talk about. I've done that. In this very video, I've done that. Because of my discomfort, my politically rooted discomfort in making moral judgments of an incident between two black men, I am instead choosing to put blinders on to a certain extent and focus on the discussion and the conversation. We all do this. And it's not an inherently bad thing. I need a lens through which to view this because, as I hope the sheer amount of stuff I've had to bring up has illustrated, there are too many angles on this for me to take everything into account and actually be able to process it and then go about and have a functional day. And I certainly can't do that for every single freaking thing that happens. The blinders, to a certain extent, are necessary. But watching the ways in which this conversation has splintered off into these fractal, frankly, troubling or just buck wild side topics and tangential issues, and bringing in people who have nothing to... Mel Gibson was trending. I'm not even sure I understand why, but I know it was connected. And another completely random thing that is tied up in all this, the Academy tweeted out that they don't condone violence of any kind, which has led to some conversation question about, are they going to take away his Oscar? Should they take away his Oscar? And there's a whole other side conversation going on about Will Smith's acceptance speech and how weird that was in the wake of the slap, but I'm not going to try and dissect that thing. I'm exhausted. And coming back to the tweet from the Academy, that has turned into its own freaking meme as people start throwing all these things of, oh, does that mean that you're no longer going to be inviting or nominating or awarding any of these people, giving a list of people who have violent histories at some point in the past, that who either have been invited to attend the ceremonies or have been awarded since those incidents and all this other stuff. And again, it's this fractal mess that just everybody brings in whatever baggage they've got and applies it to this. And again, I'm not trying to be dismissive. Some of this is relevant. Some of these are really relevant questions. But this thing is a snowball that will not stop gathering more and more crap. The way that we interact on social media in general, and Twitter especially, it creates a situation where our blinders cause us to bump into each other a lot. And to some extent, that might even be healthy. Because when you bump into somebody, you become aware of the blinders you have up. And maybe you reconsider, are these helping me? Should I be focused on exactly what I'm focused on? Should I be taking other things into account? But then on the other hand, it can absolutely put you in direct contact with people that, frankly, should not be in contact with each other because it is toxically explosive. But as other people have talked about in other places, Twitter's actually deliberately designed to cause drama and fracturing and arguments, because arguments drive engagement a hell of a lot more than nuanced conversation does. Which is why this video will probably not do nearly as well as videos in which people just give their hot take on what was or wasn't right, and who did or didn't do the right thing, or whatever else. Because when you actually try and take this stuff into account, and as I said, I've even been doing this through a lens and with blinders, it's over-frickin-whelming. It's overwhelming to think about, to process, to talk about, and probably to listen to. So if you have stayed through to this point, thank you. All right, one last time. Will Smith has at this point issued apology over Instagram. I'm just going to acknowledge it here. I'm not actually going to dive into this because, as I said, I wanted to focus this conversation around the conversation that's been going on, and I don't see the response to this really changing anybody's mind from the positions they'd already decided to take up. So with that in mind, let's wrap it up. I don't have a final conclusion. It's just something that I had to talk about to some extent just to clear my headspace. This is one of those occasions where I kind of had to process on camera. I had to talk to somebody. So I'm talking it out with you folks. And if I'm very, very, very lucky, I did it in a way that maybe people will find interesting, helpful. If I screwed this up, I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments. But whatever your thoughts are, and please, this is a hard rule on this channel, no personal attacks or insults towards anybody. You can talk all you want about people's actions, how you feel about them, etc. Do not start calling people names, because I will delete them. Regardless of what point you're trying to make, you do that and I will delete your comment. Don't do it to me. Don't do it to other commenters. That's been an issue lately. And don't do it to any of the people involved in this. So if you can stick by those rules, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon is how I'm able to do this for a living. It's why I was able to turn this around and get it out a couple of days after it happened, because I can spend my workday doing this instead of having to be in an office somewhere. So if you want to help that continue to happen, Patreon support's the best way to do it. I also have other things down below, other ways that you can support me, or other things that you can follow me on, like Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, etc., etc. But even beyond that, like, share, subscribe. They do help. But you know what? After all this, don't worry too much about it if you can help it. Because what I want you to remember is that as overwhelming as the world gets sometimes, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. It's the end credits. Means I gotta shout out some patrons. This month, it is Turok, Oliver B., Linda Walters, TT, Robin Powell, Fernobulax, The Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Dharma, Michael Doyle, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Casperl, Adam Lefty Taylor, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks so much for your support.